Okay, so this is a lecture on risk sensitivity, risk perception. This is actually what I studied. I studied this in my lab. I've studied this with animals. I've studied this with honeybees. I've looked at the brain with risk. I've even studied it with birds. And so I kind of like this lecture. I kind of like talking about this stuff. So risk sensitivity and the perception of risk is how animals and people deal with making choices where the outcome is uncertain. And how do they make those choices, and how do those choices get a little bit irrational at times? So when nothing is sure, everything is possible. So we see risk and we think about risk in these terms. We think about gambling risk or risky behavior. Sometimes that risky behavior can be fun. Sometimes it can be extremely dangerous. I'm kind of interested in risk perceptions and adolescence, for example. But where I also do some studying and where my research has some application is in economic risk, perception of gains of money and losses of money and things like this, and how people show risky behavior when they take on business decisions. So I'll talk a little bit about that, but mostly we're going to get into some theory. And one of the things that we're interested in is work with animals that I've done. Are there basic principles that then apply to human risky decisions? So if we see basic principles of risky decisions in animals, will we also see those, or can we predict those in humans? So one group that was developed at Oxford University while I was there, it's a business, it's a group, it's called Oxford Risk. And I went there for a meeting a little while ago, and that's Alex Kasalnik, and that's my friend Ed. There's me over there. We can take a look at their website, Oxford Risk. This is where people who have studied basic principles of risk start applying it to the real world and looking at clients like oil companies and banking groups and health insurance companies. So I consult with them. I'm a consultant for some of the research that they do. So let's go and learn some basic terminology about the study of risk. We say somebody, or an animal, somebody, is risk averse, or they show risk aversion if they have two options and they prefer an option with the least amount of variability or variance. Risk prone, like to take risks, like the risky option. And of course, risk indifferent, maybe they don't care about the risky option over the non-risky option. So I'm going to show you some just very basic experimental designs to make that point. So here's a little starling, here's a little bird that I worked with. Let's say if he pecked this key, he got 4 pellets of food. He got it every time. Peck it, he gets 4 pellets. But if he picks the yellow one, if he comes down here and he chooses the yellow one, half the time he only gets 2 niblets of food, and half the time he gets 6 niblets of food. Now both of them average the same amount. This averages 4 niblets of food, and this averages 4 niblets or 4 pellets of food as well. 2 plus 6 is 8, divided by 2 is 4. And what we find is the animal, even though it can get the same amount of food from both options, prefers to be risk averse. I found this in birds, I found this in honeybees, we found this in a lot of different animal models. So if you looked at all the experiments on risk with amount, most of the experimental results show risk aversion. A couple of are risk indifferent, but very few where the animal likes to take risk. Let's take the opposite. Let's take 2 options, both provide 4 pellets of food. Every time you peck blue, you peck yellow, you get 4 pellets of food if you're a bird. However, with the blue option, you are going to have to wait 5 seconds. Every time you peck it, you wait your 5 seconds, you get your food. Animals do not like to wait. This is something aversive. However, if you peck the yellow one, half the time you peck it, you only have to wait 2 seconds, but the other half you wait 8 seconds. Okay? And we're going to look at this in relationship to what we learned before about extrinsic motivations, delay discounting, things like this. But in this case, the animal likes to be risk prone. It would prefer the risky option. So risk aversion, risk indifference, these are all the experiments that if you put a lot of the experiments done on risk sensitivity with delay as the variable that shows variance, delay, animals are mostly risk prone. Now, there's a lot of theories about why this happens. So I'm going to give you just two of them. There's a lot of them. And I'm going to give you the two that are sort of out in the literature a lot. One of them deals with long-term survivability, that the brain has developed this kind of long-term survivability mechanism. And one of them doesn't really deal with amount and delay. It mostly deals with why the animal might switch. So if the animal is, let's say, gets two options, and one option has a variable, and they're trying to get enough food to survive the day, and if they get the good one, they survive, but if they get the bad one, the low amount, then they are gonna die. Why go for the variable one if the variable one is this? However, if a constant option, always go there, you don't get a whole bunch, you don't get a lot, you just get enough to survive, you probably should stick with this one. Because if you go for the variable option that sometimes is very high and sometimes very low, what if you get the low one a few more times than normal? You're going to die. So that's that kind of the idea. However, if you're on an energy budget, it's called an energy budget. In other words, if you get to a point in the day where you're not getting enough food to survive, you are not doing well, your energy budget for the day is low, that would be a time to switch. Because if the constant option is not providing you enough food, then why even go for it? Might as well take a chance. Maybe you get lucky and you get the variable option. And so there's some evidence to this that animals that are on a low energy budget, in other words, you make an animal very hungry, they become more and more risk prone. They like the variable because the variable has this one that brings them up to survival. Okay, so that's dealing with evolutionary theory and energy and optimal foraging theory. So let's say there's two options. You get 4 pellets every time. This is if they pick the blue one. They get 4 pellets every time. Let's go over here. That produces a value that goes up to this relationship of amount to utility, amount to value, and we get a value from the constant that's right there. We go to that line, which is the line that helps us convert objective amount to subjective value, and we have this amount here. Let's look at the variable option. Sometimes you get 2, sometimes you get 6. What is the value of 2? The value of 2 is this. What is the value of 6? The value of 6 is this. You go over because of this decelerating function. And if you take the average of the high, 6, and the low, 2, what you end up with is a spot right about here, which is below the constant. It has perceptually lower value, not absolute or objective value, but perceptual value or perceptual utility than the constant because of this decelerating function. It's a mathematical relationship that the variable option is perceived as having less value than the constant option, even though objectively they provide the same amount of food. Now let's look at this this delayed discounting function, maybe a hyperbolic discounting function. We can do the same thing. The constant, you have to wait 5 seconds, you have to wait 5 seconds. That really drops that out, and the constant value is here. But if you take the average of the 2 seconds and the average of the 8 seconds, 8 and 2, 8 and 2, and you translate them over to its utility, the value, well, now the variable option, the average of the value of 2 seconds and 8 seconds, has a higher perceived value than the constant. And so animals are risk prone with delay. They're risk prone with delay because of this relationship. They're risk prone with amount because of this relationship. I think these concepts need to be drawn out. I think they need to be sketched, and thought about in order to understand them well enough to show me that you understand them on an exam. Okay, so here's another way of looking at risk when we talk about good and bad. Maybe delay in this case isn't what we're talking about losses, losing money or gaining money. We talk about a curve down here that is disutility, disuse, devalued, and this up here is utility. These are the same curves that you just saw. Amount, and this one is relating to delay, but in this case we're talking about losses. In this case, maybe loss of money, if you look at people's perceptions. So if you have X amount of money, it gives you this amount of utility. If you go up and you double X, you don't necessarily double its utility because of this curve. This is the usefulness. You went from $100 to $200, but you didn't double the usefulness because of this relationship of curve. Same thing with losses. You have lost X amount. You've lost $100. Maybe you're gambling, and you lose twice as much. You've lost $200. That first loss has great disutility for you. It has great devaluing. The value is lost very rapidly. Remember what I talked about? Losses loom larger than gains. Look at that drop down. If you lose twice as much, you don't see the same doubling, the doubling of the lost value because of the way this curve is set up like this. These are not linear functions. We use this as a reference point. This is a very famous curve that's used in a lot of theories of risk-taking. So where do we see risky decision making? Well, we see, of course, in the stock market. We see it in drug industries, deciding should we spend money on developing this pill or that pill. Of course, on gambling, on insurance, in medicine, in oil industry. All these things have very strong natures of risk. So let's look at this economically. Very simple. Give you a simple little task here. Somebody comes up and offers you $1,000. You can take it, guaranteed, and go home. Or you can toss a coin. You can flip a coin. And if it's heads, you get $2,000. You double what you would have got. Or if it's tails, you get zero. You get nothing. What do you do? Which do you prefer? Think about that for just a second. What did you choose? Well, most people choose A. They are risk averse when we're talking about gain, gaining of amount. What about this one? Guaranteed get $1,000 in 2 months. You got to come back $1,000 in a month. Let's say this is what they're doing. Don't come to my office in a month, in 2 months to get $1,000. I'm just saying, thinking out loud. Or you can toss a coin. You can get your money right now. You get your $1,000 in your pocket, you get to leave, or we're going to let you wait 4 months. Most people flip the coin in this case. This is a loss of time. This is a bad thing. This is delay. Most people are risk prone with losses or delays or bad things, and risk prone with good things. Now, then we get into kind of bouncing back and forth between economic theory and these kinds of theories. And we get into some irrationalities. Would you accept a gambling that gives you a 50-50 chance of gaining 200 and a 50-50 chance of losing 100? 50% chance you gain 200, 50% chance of losing 100. That is you should take that in a second. You should take that in a second. But if you do it on a single play, you ask them one off, you just get one choice. Most people say no, because that idea of losing 100 is so much worse than the joy of gaining 200. Of course, if you do multiple plays, do it over and over, you're going to end up averaging in the long run coming out ahead. On average, you're going to lose $50 here and gain 100 here. You're going to gain, on average, $50 every time you toss the coin, on average. So this is an irrational kind of decision making, but it's what we see. We call it's robust because we see it everywhere. One manager wouldn't accept a 50-50 chance of making his company gain $300,000 or losing $60,000. They wouldn't do it because that loss is going to hit their reputation so hard, and their gain is going to not help their reputation that much. So this is a very, kind of a famous quote in the field, but several managers would respond saying they state quite clearly that they were aware that this kind of choosing is not in the best interest of their company. They would do better by taking those risks. But they felt that their choices were in their own best interest, in their own individual aspirations. So this lack of risk, and in a company you need to take risk, this risk aversion, this irrational risk aversion like this, is not good for a company. So the best way to deal with this is to tell the people that you're looking at, your employers, your employees, that you need to look at the whole portfolio. In other words, what is their work over an extended period of time, like a year? Sometimes they'll do well, sometimes they'll lose, they'll gain, they'll lose, everything like this. But you don't just look at one thing like, oh, I see you had a bad day today. I see that you've lost money for the company today. Nuh-uh. You don't even look at those things. You say, how well is this person making decisions over a long period of time? That frees them up to take risks in the short run, knowing for the fact that in the long run they're going to do much better. Okay, we see this advancement in modern day poker players. Poker players that do very well understand the objective natures of risks. If they lose a pot, they lose. It's all part of it. It's a strategy that is going to work for them in the long run. So this is the work. A lot of this work is by Danny Kahneman and Amos Tversky. Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in economics for this work on the psychology of decision making. Tversky unfortunately died before the Nobel Prize was awarded. They don't give it posthumously, so he didn't get it. But everybody said, well, if he was alive, he would have joined Kahneman in that, receiving that. So you're asking questions about, if you want people in a business, in a company, in life to make good rational decisions, you need to fight against their nature for irrational decisions. So you ask questions of what state are they making that decision in? Where are they? If they're losing a lot, they're going to start getting very, very risky, irrationally risky. If they're gaining, they're going to start getting very risk averse, and that is not good at all. Remember this? Losses loom larger than gains. They shouldn't. $100 up, $100 down is still $100 from the point of starting. But $100 down hurts more than $100 up helps. Even though objectively we're talking about the same amount of money, they should be weighted equally. And so what this kind of work does is say you should try to understand that in the context of converting objective to subjective. So let's take this study that they talk about a lot, the Kahneman and Tversky's very famous kind of study. Let's imagine, if you will, there's 600 people that are expected to die without action, and you're a doctor. You have to make a decision. By the way, they've given this all over the world. They've given it to doctors. They've given it to philosophers, whatever. It doesn't matter. So if you don't do anything, 600 people are going to die. So what are you going to do? I'll tell you what. We're going to give you an option. Option A is a treatment plan where 200 lives are saved. Option B, well, that's risky. There's a 1/3 probability of saving everybody, and a 2/3 probability of saving nobody. No lives are saved. What do you choose? Which would you choose? Look at that. Let me think. Most people choose A, because you are talking in gains. You gain lives, you save, and most people are going to be risk averse. However, if you give them this choice, Program C loses 400 lives, guaranteed, nothing you can do about it, or you can take a chance. 1/3 probability of losing no lives and 2/3 probability of losing all lives. With this one, most people choose D. Now, what's the difference between A and C? You see a difference? There is no difference. One saves 200, one loses 400. We started with 600. It's the same notion here. It's put in the same terms. It's just the only difference is this one is gained, framed as a gain, and this is framed as a loss. There's no difference here between B and D. Framed as loss, framed as gain. If you're framing things and speaking in game, people become aversive to risk. If you frame it as losses, they become more risky. We see this throughout. And for example, there was a study where doctors simply said you have two options. One is more risky than the other for treating cancer. And if you said, well, well, doc, how much will this help me? Well, you'll gain this many years if you go with this or this. They were more conservative in the kind of treatment they would get. If you say, well, doc, how is this going to help me? And the doctor would say, well, the average age of people live to 82, and you would lose so many years if you go here, so many years going there. They were more risky. It's all a turn of the phrase. So we see this a lot in misperception and irrationality of decision making. Let's take, for example, stock trading. This is a quote from a stockbroker. Sometimes you should pull out of a trade and accept your loss, but a big loss is a big loss. If you double the loss, it won't hurt your reputation much more. You weigh this against a small chance of recovering the trade and saving your reputation. This is about that disutility curve. It's irrational and it gets people in trouble. Let me give you a couple examples. There was a banker. There's a bank in Britain. It's called Barings, and it was one of the oldest banks. One of the oldest banks in England. And they had some traders, and they would trade all over the world. And there was a trader in Singapore, a guy named Nick Leeson. This happened, about 15, 20 years ago, something like that. And he got in trouble one day. He had a bad day. He's losing money. And it's a bad day. So instead of taking the losses, calling up his bosses and say, I lost a couple mil today, he didn't want to do that. He thought he'd get fired or he thought he'd get in trouble, so he started getting very risky. Very risky, very risky. And over the course of just a few days, he lost $1.3 billion for that bank. The bank went under. One of the oldest banks. He got into that cycle. This isn't the only case. There's been a lot of cases. More recently, this guy, 2008, he lost $7 billion in the same kind of thing. Of course, it took him a little longer. It took him about a week or so, and he kept having to cook the books and hide things. And people were like, excuse me, we're seeing some discrepancies here. No, I got that covered because that's this and that and this. And they let it go. He lost $7 billion. Boy, that's a lot. So let's look at this again and think about those traders. They have just lost a whole bunch. Well, they are sunk. They have a tremendous drop in disutility. So what do? If they lose twice as much, it really doesn't hurt their reputation that much more. For every increment, X, 2X, 3X, they lose less and less of their reputation, even though they're losing the same amount of money each time. So they become very risk prone. You see this sometimes with gamblers in a casino. They get to a losing and then they just keep losing. But we also see these kinds of patterns in a lot of things. Let's say somebody's on a diet and they just ate a chocolate brownie. Well, you've already gone off your diet. You've already done this bad thing. Another brownie. I'm already sunk. And we get into this sort of spiral. It's the same idea with gain. Gaining twice as much doesn't help your reputation that much. And so people, especially if they start here, they've been in the company for a while, they become more and more aversive to gain. Okay? So you've lost X, big drop in utility, lose another X, I'm saying $1 million, lose another $1 million or $100. You lose another $100, you only have a small drop in its disutility, in the power of its ability to hurt you or your reputation, or just your perception. Some of the areas of the brain that we look at when we talk about risk, one we've dealt with before when we talked about addiction. The mesotelencephalic dopamine system kind of likes uncertainty, likes risky things in certain cases, gets a big jolt when you are uncertain about the outcome and then the outcome is good. And so you see this in people who are gambling. For some people, unfortunately, they get a big rush of dopamine if they're at a slot machine and they win. They just won $100. Let's say in order to win they have to get 3 stars in a row, just saying. Well, some people, their dopamine goes off even if they just get 2. Look how close I was. The close is enough to reward that reward center, that do it again center. Another area called the anterior cingulate cortex communicates a lot with the dopamine system that I just talked about. Gets information from these dopamine cells. And it tries to readjust mistakes. So it looks at the outcome of mistakes and it readjusts. A mistake is in expectation, produces a burst of activity detected by the cortex. This is sort of the dopamine center, and this center kind of, well, trying to allow you to make better decisions in the future. Thing is this isn't a linear process. This is sort of an irrational process. Okay? All out of money, all out of time.